Peace and love to the family. Peace, love, and liberation to the family. This is Corbin, DarusCorbin, reporting live. Welcome to the Mystery School. Welcome to the Mystery School, the home of esoteric and metaphysical knowledge. I thank you for joining me once again. This evening, this presentation is going to be about Charles Darwin. The title is Darwinism and the Theory of Hate, Birth of Racism. Now, before I go in on this presentation, and trust and believe, guys, I'm going to go in. I want to play this video for you right quick. So I want you to sit back, listen, and get ready for a wonderful presentation. I thank you for joining. Let's go.
First of all, on the issue of critical race theory, etc., I'll obviously have to get much smarter on whatever the theory is. But I do think it's important, actually, for those of us in uniform to be open-minded and be widely read. And the United States Military Academy is a university. And it is important that we train and we understand. And I want to understand white rage, and I'm white, and I want to understand it. So what is it that caused thousands of people to assault this building and try to overturn the Constitution of the United States of America? What caused that? I want to find that out. I want to maintain an open mind here, and I do want to analyze it. It's important that we understand that because our soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, and Guardians, they come from the American people. So it is important that the leaders, now and in the future, do understand it. I've read Mao Zedong. I've read Karl Marx. I've read Lenin. That doesn't make me a communist. So what is wrong with understanding, having some situational understanding about the country for which we are here to defend? And I personally find it offensive that we are accusing the United States military, our general officers, our commissioned, non-commissioned officers, of being, quote, woke or something else because we're studying some theories that are out there. That was started at Harvard Law School years ago, and it proposed that there were laws in the United States, antebellum laws prior to the Civil War, that led to a power differential with African Americans that were 3/4 of a human being when this country was formed. And then we had a Civil War and Emancipation Proclamation to change it. And we brought it up to the Civil Rights Act in 1964. It took another 100 years to change that. So look, I do want to know. And I respect your service, and you and I are both Green Berets. But I want to know. And it matters to our military and the discipline and cohesion of this military. And I thank you for the opportunity to make a comment on that.
Thank you, Jack.
Welcome to Primetime COVID.
Peace and love to the family. This is DarusCorbin reporting live. I present to you Darwinism, the Theory of Hate, the Birth of Racism. Now, I'm going to cut this off so it's no confusion in the background. I guess my first question would be to the black people out there that's watching. I guess my first question would be to the black people out there watching. Does Black Lives Matter to you? Does Black Lives matter to you? Because for decades, we have been singing the same song, black people. One of our own gets killed, we march. We march. Missing girls by the masses are gone. We march. We still wonder why there's mass numbers of African American and Spanish people getting killed in the streets by cops. Like, this is an ongoing thing, and we are still scratching our head trying to figure out why this is happening. So like the general said, he wants to understand white rage, and he's white. Well, you have to understand, in order to understand this white rage, you have to go back to the people who created this rage. And before I start, I want to make this clear. This channel does no race bashing. This channel only comes with the facts. We heard about Charles Darwin based on the theory of evolution, right? Am I correct? Well, let's remind ourselves before I go in what the theory of evolution is even all about. In biology, evolution is the change in the characteristics of a species over several generations and relies on the process of natural selection. The theory of evolution is based on the idea that all species are related and gradually change over time. Darwinism is a theory of biological evolution developed by the English naturalist Charles Darwin 1809-1882 and others stating that all species of organisms arise and develop through natural selection of small inherited variations that increase the individual's ability to compete, survive, and reproduce. So you have to understand in the 1800s to the 9th century, Charles Darwin's work sealed the deal that we, as humankind, all came from apes. That's what they taught us in school. That's what we know. That humankind all evolved from apes. That's our ancestor, as science tells us. But you know my channel, guys, I give you esoteric. That means the knowledge, the hidden knowledge behind what you are hearing. Now, I have an article that I do want to share with you guys, and if I have time, I'm going to give you a little bit more about Charles Darwin himself, but we're definitely going to go in right now. And I want people to listen with their hearts and understand with their ears. This is no race bashing what I'm doing here. We are all spiritually divine people, some more than others, I have to admit. But we lack in spiritual evolution because these so-called evolutions that we have on this planet have been lies. And we're going to see tonight that Charles Darwin evolution, his theory was there was a race issue behind it. It was supported by racism. Now listen to this. Now listen to this. And we're about to go in. This is by Trinity College. I want to give a shout out to Trinity College. I want to give a shout out to Lindsay Pressman. She's the one that did this article. So shout out to Trinity College. Shout out to Lindsay. And I'm about to go in. Thank y'all for rocking with me. 8 minutes. This is the about to go in part. The concept of race was non-existent prior to the period of European and American imperialism. Race is not a biological concept. It is merely a social construction that was established in order to justify the subordination and subjugation that align with imperialist policies. The United States was not founded on democratic principles, rather it was established on the principles of scientific racism. The manipulation of scientific evidence to prove the inferiority of those that are phenotypically different. Scientific principles such as social Darwinism, the eugenics movement, and the creation of intelligent testing were utilized to support racist belief in a time when rapidly advancing scientific knowledge was regarded as prestigious, truthful, and irrefutable. Through the application of weak research methodologies lacking relatability and consumed with bias, any evidence contradicting social preconceived racist conventions was manipulated or suppressed. Scientific racism provided a justification for the long-standing domination of, and I quote, others who were deemed intrinsically inferior as a result, as well as for the political and economic advantages that followed. That's a mouthful, but bear with me here, family. The idea of social Darwinism was a product of Herbert Spencer's loosely based interpretation of Charles Darwin's theory of natural selection. Spencer introduced a new perspective on his theory, coining the term, and I quote, survival of the fittest. Spencer believed that species have an innate tendency to strive for self-preservation, which leads to competition and ultimately a winner whose strength indicates that they are best suited for survival. And I quote, if biological organisms evolve gradually by eliminating those individuals least fitted for survival, it was thought then social organisms must evolve at the same geological rate and by the same process of elimination. When applied to imperialist societies, this concept asserts that groups who are more economically, technologically, or politically advanced than the neighboring groups will naturally dominate and conquer. Are you guys listening? Are you listening? Don't pay attention to the messenger. Focus on the message. Are you listening? I hope you are. But if not, I'm going to read it again. The idea of social Darwinism was a product of Herbert Spencer's loosely based interpretation of Charles Darwin's theories of natural selection. Spencer introduced a new perspective on his theory, coining the term, and I quote, survival of the fittest. Spencer believed that species have an innate tendency to strive for self-preservation, which leads to competition and ultimately a winner whose strength indicates they are best suited for survival. And I quote, if biological organisms evolve gradually by eliminating those individuals least fitted for survival, it was thought then social organisms must evolve at the same geological rate and by the same process of elimination, end quote. When applied to imperialist societies, this concept asserts that groups who are more economically, technologically, or politically advanced than neighboring groups will naturally dominate and conquer. Listen. The successful vanquishing of one society by another is a demonstration of natural selection in action. Listen, white Anglo-Saxons used this theory to promote and validate their superiority, classifying their success as natural and inevitable rather than a result of their desire to subjugate others. The general said that he's white and he wants to understand white rage. What I'm doing now am giving you the basis, the foundation of how white people, Europeans, white Anglo-Saxons became the dominant, superior race. They took the theory of Charles Darwin and made that their basis on how they are more superior than any non-white race. Are y'all all right out there? Because I just got to the good. It's just getting good. We haven't even started yet. How are we supposed to evolve as a spiritual people if we are still hindering our blessings based on work on one race? The theory of evolution states that there are inherent limitations on species improvement, and the species eventually encounter a predetermined point they are unable to progress beyond. Let me read that again. The theory of evolution states that there are inherent limitations on species improvement, and that species eventually encounter a predetermined point they are unable to progress beyond. This concept was applied in social Darwinism to prevent social mobility, leading to the belief that a group or species position in society is fixed or has minimum capacity for improvement. However, the theoretical limitation has never stopped a species from continuing to strive to improve through competition, a central concept of Charles Darwin's theory of natural selection. Social Darwinism asserts that racial conflict is a natural means of evolutionary progress. Let me read that again. And I thank y'all for bearing with me because y'all see how, I'm trying to enlarge it and trying to minimize it to my adjustable reading. But thank you for bearing with me. We're going to get to the meat of this. The theory of evolution states that there are inherent limitations on species improvement, and that species eventually encounter a predetermined point that they are unable to progress beyond. This concept was applied in social Darwinism to prevent social mobility, leading to the belief that a group or species position in society is fixed or has minimum capacity for improvement. However, the theoretical limitation has never stopped a species from continuing to strive to improve through competition, a central concept of Charles Darwin's theory of natural selection. Social Darwinism asserts that racial conflict is a natural means of evolutionary progress. The persistent, unavoidable, and I quote, natural struggle for society improvement or social improvement through conquest or competition is embodied in this conflict between racial groups. The principles of social Darwinism would therefore label the loser of a battle as unfit or inferior. In 1884, Harvard Dean Nathaniel Schaller claimed that, and I quote, blacks were becoming extinct. This became a popular argument used to demonstrate black inferiority as a result of natural order. In 1884, Harvard Dean Nathaniel Schaller, and that's spelled Schaler, you should be having notes and pen anyway, claimed that blacks were becoming extinct. This became a popular argument used to demonstrate black inferiority as a result of natural order. Which is ironic because now, in these days, we are now, all of us, black and white, know that the European, that the white race is the ones now that are becoming extinct. Don't take my word for it, research it. Let's continue on. The idea of racial domination was sustained through social Darwinist principles. Did you hear me? The idea of racial domination was sustained through social Darwinist principles, but the act was perpetrated by the political and economic gains the dominant groups received as a result. The ceaseless control of, and I quote, inferior races was necessary in order to maintain the dominant group's survival and success. The practices, policies, and institutions of the dominant group supported their belief of the racial inferiority of other groups by attributing the failures of the subjugated group to their intimate lack of ability and inherited inferiority. And let me read that again, because I want y'all to focus. The idea of racial domination was sustained through social Darwinist principles, but the act was perpetrated by the political and economic gain the dominant groups received as a result. The ceaseless control of, and I quote, inferior races was necessary in order to maintain the dominant group's survival and success. The practices, policies, and institutions of the dominant group supported their belief of the racial inferiority of other groups. By attributing the failures of the subjugated group to their innate lack of ability and inherited inferiority, the dominant group is able to morally justify their desire to subjugate others through actions that are often in opposition to the demographic principles their society claims to be founded upon. The concept of extensive discussed in Charles Darwin's theory of evolution were used to support scientific racism. Under Darwin's theory, members of a species will have an inherited feeling of repulsion towards and a tendency to avoid anything that could be harmful or a threat to their survival. Scientists promoting scientific racism use this theory to validate inflict abhorrence towards the inferior beings, claiming it must be due to evolutionary means. By presenting, and I quote, inferior beings as something of deleterious nature to the dominant group and even a threat to survival, white people were able to provide a scientific basis for the practice of racial exclusion. This mindset negates the idea that the racial hatred could be learned or that it is derived from environmental factors and instead presents it as something natural and biological. This mindset negates the idea that this racial hatred could be learned or that it is derived from environmental factors and instead presents it as something natural and biological. Nordicism and sociological theories introduced the distinction of clear races in i.e. early 1900s. Nordicism presented the idea that civilization itself, including the political and social order, is based on race. Joseph Arthur de Gabono, one of the most influential of the Nordicists, published an essay on the inequality of the races, in which he declared his acceptance of the division of races into, and I quote, white, black, and yellow. This was 1853-1855. This led to the development of Nordic supremacy, the belief that the Aryans or whites were the only ones capable of creative thinking and civilization building. Did y'all hear that? Published essay, Joseph, who was a Nordicist, published an essay on the inequality of races, in which he declared his acceptance of the division of races into white, black, and yellow. This led to the development of Nordic supremacy, the belief that the Aryans or whites were the only one capable of creative thinking and civilization building. Following this ideology, the downfall of any civilization could be attributed to interbreeding among races. Venture de la Puig was the founder of anthroposociology. He used head shape as well as range of social desirable characteristics as a marker to divide individuals into separate races. Lepage supported the argument that the mixing of races is detrimental to a society and deemed the only solution to this racial crisis to be the elimination of inferior races. This theory represented an extreme form of scientific racism. The eugenics movement played a prominent role in providing a basis for scientific racism. Let me say this again. And for all you out there, listen, in this channel, I am raising researchers, scholars, priestess. You listen to this and I want you to research. Don't go off of what I'm saying. Do your own research so you can see for yourself as well, is a song I sing. The eugenics movement played a prominent role in providing a basis for scientific racism, developed by Francis Galton. It's important that you write this name down. Francis Galton, Galton. Francis Galton was the cousin of Charles Darwin. The founder of eugenics was the cousin of the man that gave us the theory of evolution. You see how that works, America? How many of you guys seen The House on the Haunted Hill with Taye Diggs? How many of y'all seen Lovecraft Country? And if you watch one of my previous videos, I give you a scene. Now, The House on the Haunted Hill, some of them scenes had black people back in the late 1800s from 1900s who were experimented on by eugenics. Eugenics did a lot of destroying not just the genetics of black people, but the mental stability of black people. So when you hear a lot of black people say they're having mental breakdowns, I want you to give the credit due to eugenics and people like Francis Galton, who is the cousin of Charles Darwin, who gave us the theory of evolution, and he said that all people evolved from apes. But now I'm telling you now there was a deeper meaning of that. Now I'm going to take a break from that right quick because I have some side notes that I want to get to you. Now these are some of the beliefs that Darwin and people like Darwin felt. Europeans and the white race were evolutionarily more advanced than black races. He divided humanity into distinct races according to the differences in skin, eye, or hair color. Charles Darwin felt that Europeans and the white race were more evolutionarily advanced than black races. He divided humanity into distinct races according to the difference between skin, eye, and hair color. And women, you weren't left out either. Females, you weren't left out either. This is what he said about females. Females, from the result of sexual selection, is for men to be more courageous. He's saying that the men are more courageous, pungent, and energetic than a woman, with a more of an invented genius. His brain is absolutely larger. The formation of her skull is said to be intermediate between the child and the man. So Charles Darwin also felt that the man was more courageous, more pungent, and energetic than the woman, with a more inventive genius brain than hers. Said the male brain is absolutely larger. The formation of her skull is said to be intermediate between the child and the man. Now let's go back, because I'm going to give you some more side notes. I just want to make sure I got those notes in there. Now, did you hear what I said, guys? Eugenics is EUGENICS. Now you might hear eugenics being called transhumanism. Transhumanism. The eugenics movement played a prominent role in providing a basis for scientific racism. Developed by Francis Galton, 1822. Something popped up, In 1822, 1911, eugenics is the theory of innate character qualities and the conviction that nature, not nurture, determines hereditary ability. The ideology completely disregarded the influence of an individual's environment and declared poverty, criminality, and laziness to be heritable traits associated with certain racial groups. Now listen, guys, I know I'm reading here, there, everywhere, but I'm going to keep reading it again so that it goes into your subconscious of what I'm saying. The general said he wanted to understand white rage, and he's white. Scholars, I am doing that for you tonight. Listen. The eugenics movement played a prominent role in providing a basis for scientific racism. Developed by Francis Galton, Galton, the cousin of Charles Darwin. Eugenics is the theory of innate character qualities and the conviction that nature, not nurture, determines hereditary ability. This ideology completely disregards the influence of an individual's environment and declares poverty, criminality, and laziness to be heritable traits associated with certain racial groups. Claiming, and I quote, races vary intellectually and morally just as they do physically. Races vary intellectually and morally just as they do physically. This led to the idea that the human race could be improved through selective breeding, providing even stronger foundation for acts of racial domination and belief in the intrinsic inferiority or superiority of certain racial groups. Through the use of pedigrees, Galton, and I quote, reasoned that if ability was determined by heredity, a famous man's closest male relatives were the most likely to exhibit exceptional abilities, with the characteristics diluting out with the hereditary distance. Let me read that again. Through the use of pedigrees, Galton, and I quote, said, reasoned that if ability was determined by heredity, a famous man's closest male relatives were the most likely to exhibit exceptional abilities with this characteristic diluting out with the hereditary distance. Galton's approach set the stage for the science of biometrics, which focused on biological traits that could be directly measured and calculated. In 1869, Galton published the book Hereditary Genius, in which he revealed his findings that mental abilities are inherited. Did you hear that? Galton's approach set the stage for the science of biometrics, which focused on biological traits that could be directly measured and calculated. In 1869, Galton published the book Hereditary Genius, in which he revealed his findings that mental abilities are inherited and used the data in order to rank the geniuses of men. These questionable findings, listen what I say, these questionable findings suggested the possibility of breeding a superior race of people. I'm gonna read that again, because I know y'all listening. Despite the distortion in my voices and the breakups, I know consciously and subconsciously you are listening, and you are getting white and black. You are getting your blood is boiling. That blood is boiling. Galton's approach set the stage for the science of biometrics, which focused on biological traits that could be directly measured and calculated. In 1869, Galton published the book Hereditary Genius, in which he revealed his findings that mental abilities are inherited and used these data in order to rank the geniuses of men. These questionable findings suggest that the possibility of breeding a superior race of people. This is where Hitler comes in. See, Hitler was going off of the ancient Aryan race, which he thought was a white superior race based on the teachings of India. So when you come up with Superman, I'm talking about, yes, the comic book Superman, that was based on the theology and the belief of people like Hitler, Darwin, and Galton that felt that a superior race could be created. And they felt that that superior race is and will be the white race. Thus the story of Superman. Do your research, people. Black people, y'all are out there? Because it's going to get deeper. It's going to get deeper. Where am I at? The questionable findings suggest that the possibility of breeding a superior race of people. Galton believed that Negroes were at least 2 grades below Anglo-Saxon. Now I gotta read that all over again. I just got to. I'm sorry. I gotta read it all over again. Whatever. Welcome to the DarusCorbin Mystery School. Galton, that's spelled Galton. Remember, he is the cousin of who? Charles Darwin. His approach set the stage for the science of biometrics, which focused on biological traits that could be directly measured and calculated. In 1869, Galton, who was the cousin of who? Charles Darwin, published a book called Hereditary Genius, in which he revealed the findings that mental abilities are inherited and used these data in order to rank the geniuses of men. These questionable findings suggested the possibility of breeding a superior race of people. Galton believed that Negroes were at least 2 grades below Anglo-Saxons in mental ability. So Galton, who was the cousin of Charles Darwin, believed that black people, Negroes, Negras, you melanated people, were 2 grades below white people, or the Europeans. Did you know that? Did you know that? Now, I hope these questions of why, or we keep getting murdered on the streets, I hope they're starting to be answered a little bit, but I'm still not done. You know, I do these, it's like an hour now. It's comfortable. You see, I got my pajamas. I'm comfortable right now. I'm good. He was motivated to help guide society toward achieving the superior race. The superior race. Superior race. I'm going to get it. Galton believed that Negroes were at least 2 grades below Anglo-Saxon in mental ability. He was motivated to help guide society. What? To help guide society? Did you hear that? He was motivated to help guide society towards achieving the superior race by promoting breeding between superior groups and discouraging any genetic mixing with inferior races, even going so far to seek out government intervention. That's just the way it is. Do-do-do, do-do-do. Some things will never change. Do-do-do, do-do-do, do-do-do. That's just the way it is. Oh, yeah. Pop told y'all. After this, listen to Changes by Pop. He said, I'm white, and I want to understand white rage. This is the 1800s, family. The Declaration of Independence was found in 1776, not too far off. We were excluded from America. They say that we were less than them. White people, I thank you for watching as well, because you got to understand, and you know this is nothing about no racial bashing, but how are we going to evolve as spiritual beings? You have beings out in the universe, in the cosmos, that are waiting for us to get it together. But there's this superior race called the Europeans are holding back information. In the Vatican, they are holding back information from us spiritually because of this race shit. They don't want the black people to know the truth of who they are. Because in their heart, and their soul, and their genetics, they know that it would affect them, but it won't. Just acknowledge that who we are. Damn, man, you black people, get it together. Y'all sleeping still, wake up. Tired of this shit, man. You gotta be tired too. Didn't even know I took my glasses off. God damn. Galton believed that Negroes were at least 2 grades below Anglo-Saxons in mental ability. He was motivated to help guide society towards achieving the superior race by promoting breeding between superior groups and discouraging any genetic mixing with the inferior races, even going so far as to seek government intervention, to seek government help to make sure that the whites never mix with the blacks and the indigenous people, to make sure they preserve this Superman. According to Darwin's theory of evolution, species members seek certain traits in their mates, those that will ultimately pass down the most favorable and adventurous feathers to their offspring. This purposeful mating concept was manipulated by scientists to support scientific racism. Excuse me, let me read that again. According to Darwin's theory of evolution, species members seek certain traits in their mates, those that will ultimately pass down the most favorable and advantageous feathers to their offspring. This purposeful mating concept was manipulated by scientists to support scientific racism and utilized to promote racial exclusion. The dominant group, whites, those more fit, were said to be intimately healthier than those inferior, blacks. Blacks were said to be of poor health, with higher rates of tuberculosis and venereal diseases, and low intellectual ability. Therefore, members of the, and I quote, white race were opposed to having sex with members of the, and I quote, black race, because they did not want the, and I quote, inferior or tainted genes of the blacks to be inherited by their offspring. Yes, I will read it again. According to Darwin's theory of evolution, species members seek certain traits in their mates, those who will ultimately pass down the most favorable and advantageous features to their offspring. This purposeful mating concept was manipulated by scientists to support scientific racism and utilized to promote racial exclusion. The dominant group, whites, those more fit, were said to be initially healthier than those inferior, blacks. Blacks were said to be of poor health, with higher rates of tuberculosis and venereal diseases, and low intellectual abilities. Therefore, members of the white race, and I quote, were opposed to having sex with members of the black race, I quote, because they did not want the inferior or tainted genes of the blacks to be inherited by the offspring. Are y'all all right? As the eugenics movement progressed, specific character qualities began to be attributed to certain racial groups and to the physical traits associated with that race. For example, and I quote, blacks were attributed with criminalistic tendencies, laziness, and feeble-mindedness. Any deviation from expected inherent behavior was considered a temporary state simply due to the individual's, and I quote, gentleman ability. In those cases, the individual intrinsic nature is merely being veiled and its return is inevitable. So they saying that no matter what, this is what they said in the 1800s going on to the 1900s, that blacks were attributed to criminal activities, criminal tendencies, laziness, you have heard these things, and feeble-mindedness. Any deviation from expected inherited behavior was considered a temporary state simply due to an individual's, and I quote, gentleman ability. In those cases, the individual intrinsic nature is merely being veiled and its return is inevitable. So they were saying that it may be possible for a black person to be on some gentleman shit, you know, classy. I'm a classic man, right? But he going to get back to some nigger shit. He cannot stop his nigger ways. It is inevitable that he going to be back on his nigger shit, is what they're saying. Man, shit, man. Listen, we not done. We not done. Therefore, people must be treated not based on their current behavior, listen, but based on their predisposed innate nature and temperament. Lynch mobs were used as evidence of black inferiority, claiming they were a direct result of the raping of, and I quote, white women by black men. The rape of, and I quote, white women were precipitated by a combination of the inherent rapist tendencies of blacks, and I quote, and their overwhelming desire for white women, whose blood had the potential to move them up in society. Mm, 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 mm. Mm, 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 mm. Therefore, people must be treated not based on their current behavior, my gosh, but based on their predisposed innate nature and temperament. Lynch mobs were used as evidence of black inferiority, claiming they were a direct result of the raping of white women by black men. The rape of white women was precipitated by a combination of the inherent rape tendencies of blacks and their overwhelming desire for white women whose blood had the potential to move them up in society. This is how white people thought and how some white people still think. And this is not a diss documentary or presentation. This is just a real documentary and presentation and lecture. In the early 20th century, eugenics saw increasing popularity in the United States. Madison Grant was an avid Nordicist, supremacist. Nordic, you know what Nordic is, Nordic. That was a group of in a race of white people. You can kind of almost equate them with the Vikings almost. But in the early 20th century, eugenics saw increasing popularity in the United States. Madison Grant was an avid Nordist supremacist and strongly opposed the idea that the environment could influence heredity. He believed the United States was in danger of being consumed by the inferior, unfit races and proposed two solutions. Man can breed from the best, or he can eliminate the worst by segregation or sterilization. Did y'all hear what I said, man? In the early 20th century, eugenics saw increasing popularity in the United States. Madison Grant was an avid Nordist supremacist and strongly opposed the idea that the environment could influence heredity. He believed that the United States was in danger of being consumed by the inferior, unfit races. He said these black people are going to take over. These inferior races are going to eventually take over us. And was he right? You be the judge. And he proposed two solutions. Man, and I quote, can breed from the best, or he can eliminate the worst by segregation or sterilization. Sterilizing. Among the many publications supporting hereditary as immune from environmental influences was Arthur Eastbrook. The Jukes in 1950, that's his book, I believe, The Jukes in 1950, Jukes. In the work, Eastbrook disputed the idea presented in Richard L. Dugdale's book in 1874, The Jukes, A Study in Crime, Pauperism, Disease, and Hereditary. Dugdale's work based on the observation of an impoverished family. The Jukes presented the concept that providing environmental influences such as education and medical care, maladapted hereditary tendencies could be reversed. And let me slow down, because I don't want you to miss the point by me speeding and reading fast. Dugdale's work in 1874, The Jukes, and that's spelled Jukes, A Study in Crime, Pauperism, Disease, and Hereditary. Dugdale's work based on the observation of an improvised family. The Jukes presented the concept that providing environmental influences such as education and medical care, maladapted hereditary tendencies could be reversed. Planned Parenthood, food stamps, Section 8. Are y'all with me? Food stamps, Section 8, Planned Parenthood, WIC, which was really given by the Black Panthers, and they manipulated that shit. Where am I at? Let me read this whole thing again. Eugenics policy began to circulate across the United States. Two approaches. Where are we at now? I'm right here. Excuse me. Based on the observation of an improvised family, the Jukes presented the concept that providing environmental influences such as education and medical care, maladaptive hereditary tendencies could be reversed, similar to Grant and other followers of Nordicism and anthropopsychology. Eastbrook maintained that the achievement of a superior society required the eugenic segregation and sterilization of inferior races. Eugenic policies began to circulate across the United States, taking two approaches. Listen, positive and negative eugenics. Positive eugenics involved the encouragement of the members of the superior fit white races to produce a large number of children and advocating for eugenics education, focusing on the promotion of attaining a pure and superior race. Unfortunately, negative genetics was often more publicized as the ideal approach. This approach involves the elimination of inferior types through practices such as sterilization, immigration, legislation, and laws preventing the intermarriage of races. Negative eugenics led to the implementation of acts such as the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882 and the 1924 Immigration Restriction Act, both methods of restricting immigration to the United States of race deemed inferior. The development and implication of intelligence testing in the early 20th century significantly advanced and supported the ideas of scientific racism. Lewis Terman modified the Binet-Simon scale, originally designed to prove genealogical factors were imminent. In the determination of intellectual ability and developed the Binet, and that's B-I-N-E-T, Simon intellectual scale or intelligence scale, here we go, which was known today as, in the determination of intellectual ability and developed the Binet-Simon intelligence scale, what we know as today as the IQ test. The establishment of the standardized quantifiability test gave eugenics more standing as true hard science. This IQ test was believed to be an objective, impartial test that would validate many other propositions of social Darwinism, disregarding its bias toward the more educated and cultural Anglo-Saxon whites. The results of the assessment was to use confirmed whites' worth and superiority. The test was used to justify the racial oppression and exclusion of blacks, based on a new and scientific proof of their inferiority. IQ tests thus became ideological weapons in the campaign to label certain persons so as to better exploit them. By using what they deemed to be objective measures, they provided instant truth to their results, and anyone who refuted these hard scientific facts were simply incorrect. So let me read that again, because I know you are getting it. I know you are with me, but I still want you guys to focus on what I'm saying. So I will break this down and reread just to make sure you guys get this information. So let me say it again. Thank you for continuing to watch. In the determination of intellectual ability and develop the Binet, and that's B-I-N-E-T hyphen Simon intelligence scale, what we know today as the IQ test, the establishment of the standardized quantifiable test gave eugenics more standing as a true, and I quote, hard science. This IQ test was believed to be an objective, impartial test that would validate many other propositions of social Darwinism. Disregarding its bias towards the more educated and cultured Anglo-Saxons, the results of the assessment were used to confirm that whites' worth and superiority. The tests were used to justify the racial oppression and exclusion of blacks, based on the new and scientific proof of their inferiority. IQ tests thus became ideological weapons in the campaign to label certain persons so as to better exploit them. By using what they deemed to be objective measures, they provided instant truth to their results, and anyone who refuted these hard scientific facts, and I quote, hard scientific facts, were simply incorrect. Scientific racism was developed during a time of rapid advancement of and respect for science. Let me say that again. Scientific racism was developed during a time of rapid advancement and respect for science. This led individuals to perceive any claim made by somewhat established or credible scientists to immediately become undeniable fact, regardless of whether or not the evidence used to support these claims were reliable, valid, and unbiased. And I quote, those arguments which could claim scientific sanction were not open to further attack. The scientific and the true were indiscussable. The methodologies and technique used to gauge the rank, intelligence, and abilities of different races did not have to be objective or impartial. They just had to be labeled as scientific in the public eye. Are y'all hearing this? They used the IQ test for support of white people being more superior than black races. And anybody who questioned that, it was incorrect. So as long as you had a scientific label on anything that you were disputing back in those days, it was justified. Didn't mean it was true, but since it was scientific, it was justified. And we are seeing that now with certain issues and situations, I'm carefully watching my words, with the pandemic going on. Everything is scientific numbers, scientific stats. So we're seeing nowadays in our generation right now in 2021 with this pandemic going on, that as long as you attach a science label to it, oh, well, science stats, well, statistics say, then it's going to be justified. And that's where it was back in the day concerning race and superiority with the whites versus the blacks. Thank you for rocking with me. Let's keep going. I'm almost done. As noted above, the methodologies and techniques used by scientists to prove the inferiority of blacks was poor, and the results were often manipulated or suppressed. I'm going to read that again. As noted above, the methodologies and techniques used by scientists to prove the inferiority of, and I quote, blacks were poor, and the results were often manipulated or suppressed when they failed to align with their preconceived bias conventions. One of the common character traits associated with blacks was laziness. And Dr. Ulrich B. Phillips of the University of Michigan defended this attribution by comparing cotton production among blacks and whites before and after emancipation. He compared the declining cotton production among the blacks of Mississippi to the increasing cotton production among the whites of Oklahoma and Texas. Phillips used this evidence to prove the inherent laziness of blacks while completely disregarding the land condition at the time, especially the overused land of Mississippi. Did y'all hear that? Are y'all still with me? Almost going on an hour. Dr. Ulrich B. Phillips of the University of Michigan in 1913 attributed the laziness of blacks by comparing cotton production among blacks and whites before and after emancipation. He compared the declining cotton production among the blacks of Mississippi to the increasing cotton production among the whites of Oklahoma and Texas. You see, that's 2 states versus 1. Philip used the evidence to prove the inherent laziness of blacks while completely disregarding the land condition at the time, especially the overused land of Mississippi. When results of intelligence of abilities testing did not align with what was expected or preferred, they were simply not published and were suppressed. Did you hear that? Census report indicates low level of insanity and suicide among blacks. I know y'all loving this presentation, no matter what color you are, because it's truth. Listen to this. Census reports indicated low levels of insanity and suicide among black people. What? But yet we the main ones having mental breakdowns right now. I'm going to say that again, and I hope you guys highlight this. Where am I at? Census reports indicated low levels of insanity and suicide among blacks, which scientists attribute to blacks not having enough brain to go insane. Eat that bitch. Seriously, this is what they said. Census report indicated low levels of insanity and suicide among blacks, which scientists attribute to blacks not having enough brain to go insane and being too good-natured to commit suicide. And you gotta admit, black people, we are the most good-natured people. Too good, if you ask me, too good in nature. That's why we're having this presentation right now. God damn. Where I'm at. I'm going to read that one more time. I'm going to leave it alone. Census report indicated low levels of insanity and suicide among blacks, which scientists attributed to blacks not having enough brain to go insane and being too good-natured to commit suicide. However, when the suicide rate later increased, The scientists modified their explanation, claiming that the minds of black people were weak and unable to handle stress. Did you guys hear that? It changed. It changed. It changed. It went from them saying that we didn't have enough brain to go insane and that we were too good natured to be suicidal. But then when the suicide rates within us increased, they say black people were weak and unable to handle stress. Ain't that a bitch? The scientific, and I quote, the scientific facts, whatever they happen to be, were manipulated by biased investigation. Excuse me, it keeps scrolling on me. I think a certain energy don't want me to read this no more. Certain energy saying, man, come on, man, you done banged us in the head too much now. Come on now. Hold up, where we at here? If y'all can see what I see, it keeps going back on me. The scientific facts, whatever they happen to be, were manipulated by biased investigators to demonstrate. The scientific fact, whatever they happen to be, were manipulated by biased investigators to demonstrate their preconceived and unshakable conventions. The bell curve written by Bernstein and Murray in 1994 echoed the assertion of fixed IQ among blacks and whites. The authors contend that genetics not only shape individual characteristics, and I quote, culture, intellect, and knowledge are racially determined, fixed, and hence not subject to devices of social reconstruction. Bernstein and Murray believe that negative traits of an individual's behavior are predetermined, therefore unchangeable. This idea encouraged opposition to compulsory education or government intervention, finding efforts for equal opportunity to be a waste of time and resources. If these compensatory actions were administered, Bernstein and Murray designated them to be destined to fail. They felt that since the inferiority of blacks was of genetic predisposition and therefore fixed, giving them social consideration would be futile. There are memorable examples of when the position of blacks in society, socially, politically, and economically, has been attributed to their disposition rather than their situation. Scientific racism called the dominant groups whites to feel superior, and all the privileges, opportunity, education, and respect associated with whiteness to feel earned and natural. Blacks were believed to have genetic predisposition for criminality based on the principles of scientific racism. In truth, criminality results from poverty and degradation. All factors blacks became subject to because they were labeled as biological and socially inferior. I'm going to read that again, guys, because I'm almost done. I am almost done. There are myriad examples of when the position of blacks in society, socially, politically, and economically, has been attributed to their disposition rather than their situation. Scientific racism caused the dominant group, whites, to feel superior, and all the privileges, opportunity, education, respect associated with whiteness to feel earned and natural. Blacks, I quote, blacks were believed to have a genetic predisposition for criminality based on the principles of scientific racism. In truth, criminality results from poverty and degradation, all factors blacks became subject to because they were labeled as biological and socially inferior. They are victims of the system, continuously being placed in situations that are precursors of criminality. They are then blamed as individuals with a dispositional assignment for their failures. Whites are blind to their own privilege and unearned advantages, having been normalized by a society established on imperialism and racism. As a result, the negative circumstances and systems in which blacks are placed is ignored, and what is actually the fault of inequalities of resources, opportunities, and success is assigned instead as dispositional blame on individuals. Race was developed by imperialist nations seeking a justification for domination and subjugation of others. Social Darwinism, the eugenics movement, and intelligent testing all played a significant role in the advancement of scientific racism. Evolution was used to support scientific racism in order to get these declarations of inferiority and I quote scientific backing and provide validation for racial domination and exclusion. This type of scientific thinking was of a closed nature, which took no consideration of any evidence in conflict with proposed theories. The impartial and biased aspects of methodology and techniques used in research were ignored, and when results failed to align with perceived biases, they were often manipulated or suppressed. Thus, this intentional ignorance was able to perpetrate because of the overpowering trust people had in science, making any scientific claim immediately, truthfully, and indisputable. An hour and 5 minutes, and I'm going to read that again. And before I end, family, if you like this presentation and you want to know more about Charles Darwin, let me know in the comments. Y'all got to stop just watching and maybe hitting a thumbs up or a thumbs down. Comment. I want to hear y'all comment. Because this is very important, not just to black people, but to white people. You have now read why black lives really should matter. And we haven't even touched spiritually why we really should matter. But in order for us to spiritually as a humankind come together, we first must have to address this. White people must address this. Don't say black people have an issue. You guys have to address the hurt, the pain, the corruption that you have brought not just on blacks, but Indians and every non-white race. So I'm going to read that again. And if you listen closely to the end, you see what's happening now with scientific labels and how, because it's scientific, people are going to run with it instead of just believing who they are and believing the body. Thank you for watching the DarusCorbin Mystery School. Please leave comments. Let me know how you feel about this. Thank you. There are myriad examples of when the position of blacks, and I quote, blacks in society, socially, politically, and economically has been attributed to their disposition rather than their situation. Scientific racism caused the dominant group, whites, to feel superior and all the privileges, opportunity, education, respect associated with whiteness to feel earned and natural. And I quote, blacks were believed to have genetic predispositions for criminality based on the principle of scientific racism. In truth, criminality results from poverty and degradation. All factors, and I quote, blacks became subject to because they were labeled as biologically and socially inferior. They are victims of this system, continuously being placed in situations that are precursors of criminality. They are then blamed as individuals with a dispositional assignment for their failures. And I quote, whites are blind to their own privilege and unearned advantages, having been normalized by a society established on imperialism and racism. As a result, the negative circumstances and system in which blacks, and I quote, blacks are placed is ignored. And what is actually the fault of inequalities of resources, opportunities, and success is assigned instead of dispositional blame on individuals. Race was developed by imperialist nations seeking a justification for the domination and subjugation of others. Social Darwinism, the eugenics movement, and intelligence testing all play a significant role in the advancement of scientific racism. Evolution was used to support scientific racism in order to give these declarations of inferiority. And I quote, scientific backing and provide validation for racial domination and exclusion. This type of scientific thinking was of a closed nature, which took no consideration of any evidence in conflict with proposed theories. The impartial and biased aspects of methodologies and techniques used in research were ignored. And when results failed to align with preconceived bias, they were often manipulated or suppressed. This intentional ignorance was able to perpetrate because of the overpowering trust people have in science. Did you hear what I said? Did you get that? Many making any, and I quote, scientific claim immediately truthful and indisputable. I thank you for watching. People, my message to you is don't believe everything that you hear just because it's scientific. Stats, research, know your worth. Black people, know your worth. White people, know your worth. Every race on this planet, know your worth. But what you cannot do is hinder the spiritual evolution of a race because you feel that that spiritual race and evolution of that race is going to hinder yours. You cannot stop the inevitable. And I hope this presentation has got to not just you, but the world. To the Vatican, who holds our secrets and are stopping us from spiritually evolving or trying to stop us. To the Pope and the Vatican, it is time for you to release those books that are important to humankind for our spiritual evolution. To the Vatican, stop playing with the melanated race. Well, this has been another DarusCorbin Mystery School presentation. Until next time, I'll see you soon. Peace, love, and liberation. I can see clearly now. The rain is gone. I am that I am, the son of the mother God. Age of Aquarius. Let's go.